There is a shelf in my root cellar right now that has jars on it from 3 years ago. Tomatoes from my garden, pickled green beans, apple butter, and a few quarts of pork that went into the jar in autumn and has not been touched since. All of it is still good. None of it has ever seen a refrigerator. If you want to know how that is possible, stay through this video because I am going to walk you through every method we use, in order, with the exact materials and the exact reasoning behind each one. If this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and share it with someone who has been thinking about getting more serious about food storage. Now let me get into it. My name is Samuel Yoder. I farm in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, and I have been feeding a family of 9 through every winter for 30 years without a refrigerator in the house. This is what we use and exactly how we use it. I want to start with something that I think gets lost when people talk about food preservation, which is why it exists in the first place. It is not a hobby, it is not a trend. For my community, it is the difference between eating well in February and not eating well in February. We grow what we eat, and we store what we grow, and everything that comes off this farm in summer has to last until the next summer, or we have a problem. That is the framework inside which every method I am going to describe was developed. Not by me, but by generations of people who had to make it work because there was no alternative. The refrigerator is a remarkable machine. I am not dismissing it, but it is also a machine that runs on electricity, breaks down, and makes people dependent on a supply chain they do not control. When that supply chain is interrupted, people with refrigerators and no other skills are in a very different situation from people who know how to preserve food without one. Every method in this video has been used continuously by families in my community for well over 100 years. Some of them go back much further than that. They work. They are not difficult to learn. And once you have the knowledge, you have it for life. Water bath canning is the method I use most, and it is the one I would teach first to anyone starting out. It is not complicated, but it requires attention and it requires understanding why each step matters. If you rush it or skip steps, you will know quickly because the jars will not seal, and an unsealed jar is not storage, it is just leftovers. The principle is straightforward. You pack food into glass jars, seal them with a 2-piece lid, and submerge them in boiling water for a specified amount of time. The heat inside the jar drives out oxygen, and when the jar cools, the lid seals against the rim and creates a vacuum. Bacteria need oxygen and moisture to grow. Inside a properly sealed jar, there is neither. The food does not spoil because the conditions for spoilage have been removed. Water bath canning works for high-acid foods. Tomatoes, fruits, pickles, jams, jellies, and anything with enough natural acid to prevent the growth of the most dangerous bacteria. For low-acid foods like green beans, corn, meat, and most vegetables, you need a pressure canner, which reaches higher temperatures than boiling water and is the only safe method for those items. This distinction matters a great deal. I am going to explain both, but I want to be clear from the start that the method you choose depends entirely on what you are canning. For water bath canning, you need mason jars in good condition with no chips or cracks on the rim. New lids every time, because the sealing compound on the underside of the lid only works once, and a pot deep enough to cover your jars by at least an inch of water. Fill your jars with prepared food, leaving the correct headspace, which is usually 1/4 to 1/2 inch, depending on what you are packing. Wipe the rim of the jar clean before putting the lid on because any residue on that rim will prevent a proper seal. Lower the jars into the boiling water and process them for the time specified for that particular food and your elevation. When you take them out and they cool, you will hear the lids pop down one by one as the vacuum forms. That sound means it worked. Properly water bath canned tomatoes will last on a shelf for 2 to 5 years with no change in safety and only a gradual decline in texture. We have jars that are 3 years old, and the contents are indistinguishable from what we put in. The quality does not fall off a cliff at some arbitrary date. It declines slowly and still tastes far better than anything from a store. The most common mistake people make with water bath canning is not processing long enough, which leaves bacteria alive inside the jar, and not leaving correct headspace, which can prevent the seal from forming properly. Both of these are simple to get right once you have done it a few times. The first batch is the hardest. After that, it becomes routine. Pressure canning is how we store green beans, corn, potatoes, carrots, and meat for long periods. A pressure canner is not the same as a pressure cooker, though they look similar. A pressure canner is built to maintain a specific internal pressure, which raises the temperature of the water inside to around 240 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature is what kills Clostridium botulinum spores, which is the bacterium responsible for botulism and which cannot be killed by boiling water alone. This is not something to be casual about. Low-acid vegetables canned in a water bath without sufficient acid added are genuinely dangerous. The pressure canner exists precisely to make those foods safe. We can green beans every August. A day of processing fills enough quart jars to carry us through to the following spring. The beans go into the jar raw or lightly blanched, covered with water and a small amount of salt, sealed, and processed at 10 pounds of pressure for the correct time based on jar size. When they come out and cool and seal, they are shelf-stable for 3 to 5 years. The texture changes slightly with storage, but the flavor holds and the nutrition is largely intact. Meat can be pressure canned as well, and this is something that surprises people who have not seen it done. Pork, venison, beef, and chicken all go into the jar raw or lightly browned, with no liquid needed because the meat produces its own during processing. The result is fully cooked, tender meat in its own broth that can be opened and used directly in a meal without any further cooking. We process pint jars of pork every fall after butchering, and those jars sit in the cellar and get used through the winter and into the following year. It is not dried or salted or smoked. It is just meat in a sealed jar, and it is safe and good to eat for years. The pressure canner itself requires maintenance. The gasket seal inside the lid needs to be inspected and replaced when it becomes stiff or cracked. The pressure gauge should be tested for accuracy once a year at your local extension office, most of which will do this for free. A faulty gauge is the most common reason home pressure canning fails to reach safe temperature, so this is worth taking seriously. My root cellar is built into the hillside behind the house. The walls are stone and the floor is packed earth. In the middle of January, the temperature in that cellar sits between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit without any mechanical assistance. In the hottest part of summer, it climbs to around 55. That temperature range, combined with the moderate humidity that comes from the earth itself, is exactly what root vegetables need to remain dormant and edible for months without any processing at all. Potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips, and celeriac all store well in a root cellar. The key is understanding that each vegetable has different requirements and treating them accordingly. Potatoes need to be kept in complete darkness because light triggers them to produce solanine, a compound that makes them bitter and in large amounts mildly toxic. They do best packed loosely in wooden crates with good air circulation and should not touch each other directly. We store ours in the darkest corner of the cellar, well away from the door. Carrots, beets, and turnips store best packed in slightly damp sand or sawdust in wooden boxes. The sand maintains just enough moisture to prevent the vegetables from shriveling while keeping them cool and separated from each other. The sand also insulates against any temperature fluctuations near the cellar door. We have pulled carrots out of sand-packed boxes in April that were as firm as the day they went in. Apples and pears can be stored in a root cellar, but they require separation from vegetables. Apples produce ethylene gas as they ripen, and ethylene causes root vegetables to sprout and deteriorate faster. We keep our apples in the upper section of the cellar in slatted crates, wrapped individually in newspaper when we have the time or simply spread in single layers. Stored this way, a good keeping variety like Stamen or York will stay sound well into February or even March. The root cellar is not complicated to build if you are starting from scratch. A hillside or an earthen berm on the north side of a structure provides natural insulation. The floor should drain freely so moisture does not pool. Ventilation is important to prevent the buildup of ethylene and carbon dioxide. 2 vents, one low and one high on opposite walls, allow air to circulate without letting in enough warm air to raise the temperature significantly. The door should be insulated and fit tightly. That is the whole structure. People build them from concrete block, from stone, from treated lumber, and from poured concrete. The material matters less than the insulation, the drainage, and the ventilation. Fermentation is the oldest food preservation method that exists. Humans were doing it 9,000 years ago, which we know from archaeological evidence, and it works on a principle that is simple once you understand it. Beneficial bacteria, primarily lactobacillus species, consume the sugars in food and produce lactic acid as a byproduct. That lactic acid lowers the pH of the food to a level where harmful bacteria cannot survive. The food is preserved not by killing all biology, as canning does, but by establishing the right biology so that the wrong biology cannot take hold. Sauerkraut is the fermented food I make most often. Cabbage is shredded finely and mixed with 2% of its weight in salt. The salt draws water out of the cabbage through osmosis, creating a brine in which the naturally present lactobacillus bacteria can multiply. The cabbage is packed tightly into a crock or a jar, weighted down so it stays submerged under its own brine, and left at room temperature for anywhere from 1 week to several months, depending on how sour you want the final product. The only thing that can go wrong during this process is allowing the cabbage to rise above the brine, which exposes it to air and allows mold to form on the surface. Keep it submerged and it will ferment correctly every time. Properly fermented sauerkraut stored in a cool cellar will keep for a year or longer. We make a large batch every fall and eat from it through the winter. The flavor develops and deepens over time. A jar that has been in the cellar for 6 months is noticeably better than one that was freshly fermented. The probiotics in the finished product are also genuinely beneficial to digestion, though that is a secondary benefit. The primary one is that we have an abundant, stable food supply through the months when nothing is growing. Fermented pickles are different from vinegar pickles. A fermented pickle is made with salt brine and no vinegar. The sour flavor comes entirely from lactic acid produced by fermentation, and the texture holds up better over time than a vinegar pickle because the fermentation preserves the cell structure of the vegetable. Cucumbers, green beans, and beets all ferment well, using the same basic principle as sauerkraut. The salt concentration for vegetables is typically 2 to 3% by weight of the water used for the brine. Fat sealing is a preservation method that most people in my community are familiar with because we process a great deal of pork and the lard is a natural byproduct of that process. When cooked meat is submerged in clean rendered fat and allowed to cool, the fat solidifies around the meat and creates a physical barrier against oxygen. Without oxygen, the bacteria that cause spoilage cannot grow. The meat stored this way does not need refrigeration as long as the fat seal remains intact and the storage temperature stays cool enough to keep the fat solid. We use this method primarily for sausage and for cooked pork. After the meat is cooked through, it goes into a clean crock or jar while still hot. Rendered lard that has been heated to kill any moisture is poured over the meat until it is completely covered with at least an inch of fat above the surface. The container is allowed to cool and then move to the cellar. The fat layer hardens and seals the meat inside. To access the meat, you cut through the fat layer, remove what you need, and pour a thin layer of fresh melted lard back over the surface to reseal it. The quality of the lard matters. Lard that has not been rendered properly retains moisture, and moisture trapped inside the fat layer provides a place for bacteria to grow. We render our lard slowly over low heat until all the moisture is cooked off and the fat runs clear. The cracklings that remain are a separate product. The clear rendered lard is what goes into storage. Stored this way in a cool cellar, sausage and cooked pork will keep for 4 to 6 months without any deterioration in quality. The French call this technique confit, and they have been using it on duck and goose legs for centuries. We did not borrow the term from them, and they did not borrow it from us. The method developed independently in multiple cultures because fat is a good barrier against oxygen, and people who had no refrigeration discovered that fact through trial and necessity. Drying is the simplest of all preservation methods in concept. Bacteria and mold require moisture to grow. Remove enough moisture from food and neither can establish. The challenge is removing enough moisture efficiently and completely without destroying the food in the process. We dry apples every fall. The varieties that keep best for drying are the ones with lower moisture content to begin with. Varieties like Northern Spy or Cortland rather than the very juicy eating varieties. The apples are peeled, cored, and sliced into rings about a 1/4 inch thick. We dry them on wooden slatted trays in our bake oven at a very low temperature, around 135 degrees Fahrenheit, for 8 to 12 hours, depending on the moisture content of that particular batch. They are done when they feel dry and leathery with no stickiness in the center when you press them. Dried apple rings stored in a sealed jar in a cool, dry place will keep for 1 to 2 years with no loss of edible quality. Dried apples were a staple in this community long before any of the methods I have already described were common. Before pressure canners, before commercial jar lids with rubber seals, people were drying apples on rooftops and hanging strips of dried meat from rafters. It is the method that requires the least equipment. Venison and pork can both be dried into jerky. The meat is sliced thin, against the grain for tenderness, or with the grain for a chewier texture, and dried at a temperature of at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure any pathogens present in the raw meat are killed before or during the drying process. We salt and season the meat before drying. The salt helps draw out moisture and contributes to the final shelf life. Properly dried jerky, stored in a sealed container in a cool, dry place, will keep for 4 to 6 months at room temperature and considerably longer in a cellar. Herbs and vegetables can also be dried. We dry tomatoes, peppers, beans, and a full range of herbs from the garden. Dried tomatoes reconstitute well in soups and stews and take up a fraction of the storage space of canned tomatoes. Dried beans are simply mature beans left to dry fully on the vine before harvest, then shelled and stored in covered jars. Dried beans will keep for decades and still cook up perfectly. The nutritional quality declines over many years, but the food itself remains safe, edible far longer than most people realize. Storing eggs in wood ash is a method that sounds strange the first time you hear it, and I understand that reaction, but the chemistry behind it is sound and the results are reliable. Clean, dry wood ash is alkaline. Alkalinity creates an environment that is hostile to the bacteria and mold that cause eggs to spoil. When eggs are packed in ash, the alkaline environment around the shell slows the passage of bacteria through the shell's pores and extends the storage life of the egg significantly. The ash must come from clean, untreated wood. No scented logs, no painted or treated lumber, no coal ash. Hardwood ash from a wood stove or fireplace burning split cordwood is what you want. It must be completely dry. Damp ash will not work and may actually introduce moisture that accelerates spoilage. The eggs go in unwashed. In our community, we do not wash eggs before storage because washing removes the natural bloom, which is a thin coating on the shell that also helps prevent bacteria from entering. Eggs packed in dry ash can keep for 3 to 5 months in a cool location without refrigeration. Root vegetables can also be stored in ash for similar reasons. Ash around beets and carrots provides insulation, keeps moisture away from the skin of the vegetable, and creates the slightly alkaline environment that discourages mold growth on the surface. We use this primarily for beets that do not fit in our sandboxes, and for any root vegetables going into a storage area that is slightly less climate controlled than the main cellar. Salt curing is how we preserve pork through the winter, when the cellar is not cold enough to prevent spoilage in fresh meat. Salt draws moisture out of meat through osmosis, and without moisture, the bacteria that cause spoilage cannot survive. When done correctly, salt-cured pork will keep for months at cellar temperature with no refrigeration required. We butcher in late November when the weather has turned cold. The hams and shoulders are rubbed heavily with a curing mix of coarse salt, a small amount of curing salt containing sodium nitrite, brown sugar, and black pepper. The nitrite in the curing salt is what prevents the growth of Clostridium botulinum in an anaerobic environment, which is the main safety concern with cured meat. Plain salt alone is not sufficient for thick cuts of meat. The curing salt is a specific product sold for this purpose, and the proportion matters. Too little and the cure is not effective. Too much creates an unpleasantly salty product. After the initial rub, the meat rests in a cool location, ideally around 38 degrees Fahrenheit, for 1 day per pound of weight. During that time, the salt penetrates deeper into the muscle and the cure distributes evenly. After the curing period, the meat is rinsed, allowed to dry, and either moved to cold storage or hung in the smokehouse. A properly cured and smoked ham will keep for 6 to 12 months hanging in a cool, dry building without any refrigeration. The Smithfield ham tradition in Virginia is built on this same method, and those hams are stored at room temperature for a year or more. If you found this useful, share it with someone who has been thinking about food storage and does not know where to start. Subscribe to the channel if you want more of this kind of content. Give the video a like so more people can find it. I read comments and I will answer questions when I can. Until next time, keep your cellar cool, your brine at the right salt level, and your jars sealed tight.